Hi there, I'm Tom Spencer. This week on Central Texas Gardener, take a look at troubled trees and how to replace them with April Rose from TreeFolks. On tour, head to San Antonio's historic King William District to meet a no-lawn garden that defies drought. Daphne answers your top question, makes her pick of the week, and Trisha has your backyard basic tip. So let's get growing right here, right now.
Support for Central Texas Gardener comes from GeoGrowers, offering custom soil blends for lawns, gardens, xeriscaping, and organic landscaping supplies. More information at geogrowers.net.
Since drought is a long-term fact of life, let's head to San Antonio's King William District, where this restoration connects with its historic water-wise roots.
In San Antonio's historic King William District, Gary Woods built a new home to blend in with the neighboring ones dating from 1910. His new garden actually takes a cue from 1910 as well, since he stops watering plants once they're established.
This was actually a parking lot for the electric company. It wasn't paved, but trucks would park here, and it was all compacted soil, and it was just it had been a vacant lot since 1946.
The only thing on it was a pecan tree. Gary restored it and the compacted soil while the house was in its design stage.
I got 75 yards of mulch and rented a bobcat, which was a blast, and then spread the mulch all across the lot, and it sat there for 4 or 5 years until the actual breaking of ground and stuff, and all that decayed, and so now it's rich black soil.
Architect Stephen Cawley built his green designs around outdoor living rooms. One houses the living room and kitchen. The other is the bedroom and bathroom.
It's kind of like the idea of a Mexican home where there's a central courtyard, except it's done in the style of this bungalow style of house. But the idea of really the garden and the courtyards were designed, and the house had to fit around that. So the garden took priority over the house in a way.
From inception, Cawley worked with garden designer Elizabeth McGreevy.
The first main objective was to connect the two parts of the houses. You had the kitchen and living over here, you had the bedroom and bathroom over here. And to have this breezeway, almost like a dog trot style, but it's all open. We wanted to make this outdoor pergola really large, structural, so it really is part of the house and not just an add-on. We made it massive, and it is going to eventually have wisteria vines covering it to add like a ceiling of sorts and to cool the breezes.
From the main entrance gate, the viewpoint ended on their neighbors' windows. McGreevy designed a trellis to alter the perspective.
It's not that we had to completely block the house, you just want to direct the eye down so that becomes your focus, not the neighbor's house. And I also want to give the sense of more spaciousness, of creating a sight line so it feels larger. I mean, this is a small lot, but I create a lot of sight lines to give the feeling of spaciousness.
McGreevy's idea of a red bench completes the visual redirection and connects to the breezeway's red chairs. Another pergola unifies the breezeway spot from the kitchen to the outdoor dining room off the interior living room.
It's like there's indoor and outdoor rooms, and they all have a relationship to each other. So if you're standing in the living room, there's a patio next to it that has about the same size. It's the adjacent room. And here in this patio, it's adjacent to the kitchen. And so it makes every room seem bigger and connected. It's kind of like walking through a house with a series of rooms, except it's indoor and outdoor rooms mixed together. So I can even stand in my bathroom and look out into the patio while I'm brushing my teeth in the morning.
The pergolas, along with strategically placed trees, capture the southeast breeze off the nearby San Antonio River for outdoor air conditioning. They even directed the airflow with a gap in the front yard fence.
It's small, but that's large enough to kind of help funnel and draw the wind that way. So every single thing has a purpose. There's nothing random about this design.
Elizabeth layered plants for structure, wildlife attention, and low care in a no-lawn garden.
First of all, I'm very lazy, and I don't like to have to work that hard. I don't have any lawnmower. I don't even have a weed whacker. So I really wanted something that was low maintenance. And also, I just didn't want to spend the money on water. My water bill generally is under $30 a month. I mean, just for one person, but it's $30 a month, and so that's part of it. But part of it for me, a lawn is just wasted space. I mean, I'm not playing sports, so I just want those spaces in my yard to actually be rooms that I can use and enjoy.
The rooms continue around the house for different encounters. On this corner lot, one wide view from the street favors Southwest Texas scrub plants. On the other street side, it's reminiscent of 1910. But step inside the interior courtyard for a new look at things. The garden's success in dry and wet times started with soil restoration and the right plant for each site.
The plant is not happy, it's going to become high maintenance. The summer of 2011, we had temperatures in excess of 100 degrees. And while everyone's yards were dying everywhere, their grasses were dying, the trees are turning brown. But in Gary's yard, with no supplemental irrigation, and he only watered the things he had planted in the last few months, everything he had planted that's already established 3 or 4 years ago, no water whatsoever, no water. We gotta be more selective and diligent about getting plants in the right place and restoring our soil. It's important, it's imperative, to really try to reduce water consumption in our landscapes. It's like right now, 30% of our water use? And I talk to people all the time who are watering every 2 days. And, we need to get it down to where it's typical every 2 weeks if you really want a lush landscape. But we need to get past these ideas of it being overly lush, blooming all the time. Yards that say green all the time. Be willing to change with the seasons.
Connection to the seasons through companionship of spaces was Gary's vision from the start.
It's really worth having your house, the inside of your house, connect with the outside of your house. That you don't want to be sealed up in your house or outside on the lawn. You want the division between the two houses to open up. You find yourself outside much more often, just for little daily things. You just come outside and have a cup of coffee in the morning when you're getting ready to go to work in 5 minutes. But it's no big deal because it's just part of your living space. It's not a special thing, it's just a daily thing.
Thanks so much for sharing your garden with us. And now we're going to be talking about trees and how to take care of all these dying trees around us. There's a big tree die-off going on in Central Texas, and I'm joined by April Rose from the organization TreeFolks. Welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me, Tom.
We want to talk about good things about trees, but there is kind of a tree crisis going on right now in our region because of the drought. Mm-hmm. Before we dive in and start talking about spotting trees in trouble and knowing all those things, real briefly describe the mission of TreeFolks.
Yeah. TreeFolks is a local nonprofit organization. We've been around almost 25 years. Each year we plant more than 10,000 trees a year in Central Texas, and we do that largely through our volunteer tree planting events, and we also teach people about why trees are important and how they can take care of trees.
Okay, well, let's talk about taking care of trees. Okay. We are experiencing massive die-off, unlike anything this region has seen since the 1950s, for sure. And the drought is the primary culprit, right? Right.
Yeah, we had exceptional heat in 2011 as well. And so the heat coupled with the drought that year caused an estimated 10% loss of tree canopy statewide.
And when people think about this, we're literally talking about tens of millions of trees.
Yeah, in Austin, we know we have an estimate of how many trees we have on public land based on some inventory data. Of the public trees alone, just public trees along streets and in parks, there's about 300,000. And so from 2011, that translates to about 30,000 trees lost in just that year. But the impacts of drought and heat don't just stop that year.
Right.
That drought and heat stresses trees. It causes them to use their stored carbohydrates and in subsequent years makes those trees that survived more vulnerable to insects and disease or other
Wind or
subsequent
anything.
droughts, wind. So
Right.
the trees that remained and survived are potentially more vulnerable because those drought and heat implications from 11 are still
Right.
affecting them.
Right. Well, let's. What do people need to be aware of when they look at they step outside their back door, they look at their trees? What are some danger signs they should be aware of that their trees might be in trouble?
They should, people often don't really look up until it's too late.
Right.
They just kind of take for granted those trees are always going to be there. And it is important to really think about the health of your trees. And if you are looking up and observing changes in the tree canopy, you are more likely to catch something early on when you can affect change. So
Right.
the kinds of things you could look for would be yellowed leaves, scorched leaves, even a decrease in leaf size. So sometimes as a tree is more and more stressed, the average leaf size will decrease. Dieback, where you're seeing more and more twigs as opposed to leaves, so twig dieback, which would lead eventually to
Branch
limb
dieback,
dieback, is a very obvious sign. And then also wounds along the trunk.
Cavities in
at
the trunk,
Yeah,
exactly.
all of that can be signs of things that may or may not be directly related to the drought, but could contribute to weakening a tree.
Right.
And so it's things to look at and note and then ask an arborist to come out and help you
Right.
determine what can you do to take more proactive care of your tree.
And one of the things I always advocate for is that when you say being proactive about trees, is looking at the architecture, if you will, of the trees. Are there some branches that look really out of sorts?
Right.
I mean, are they leaning out in precarious ways?
Yeah.
It might call for preventative pruning, right?
Absolutely. Structural pruning, training pruning, pruning for clearance. There's a lot of good reasons to prune trees that are more likely in an urban area than obviously in a
Right.
wooded setting where there aren't as many obstacles like houses and power lines and pedestrians.
Or pedestrians or cars and driveways.
Exactly. And
Right.
so if people, they can learn pruning on their own and they can do it themselves, or they should hire an arborist if they feel that it's beyond their safety
Right.
capacity. But a little bit of preventative structural pruning regularly will help ensure that the wound size is minimized. You can make
Right.
smaller minor corrections early on to maximize the structure, the
Right.
architectural
And it'll cost a
strength
lot less,
of the
too.
canopy. It'll cost much less. The tree is more likely to be able to seal off that wound if it's smaller. And so over the long term, you're going to promote the strongest canopy that's going to be the most resilient
Right.
to the stresses of wind.
Right.
And so really proactive intermittent pruning is a very good investment.
Okay, there are other things that we can do that are proactive that really help the general health of the tree and help sustain it over time. You know, most urban settings and suburban, for that matter, are not. The landscape is not really friendly to trees. We have turf, which we water just deep enough so that the turf survives, and we don't allow leaf litter or things like that, which trees really depend on, right?
Absolutely. You think about the urban environment where some trees were preserved during construction, but often many of the trees that we see today in our landscapes are planted. So in the construction process, often soils are removed
Right.
and
Or
brought in
abused.
and or compacted.
Right.
And so you're often dealing with a real diminished product to begin with. The growing medium is often not very supportive to nurture
Right.
our trees. And without a really good, healthy growing medium, we can't really expect our trees to be vigorous and to thrive. And so it's important to try to nurture that growing medium by proactively mulching and watering and doing what we can to really encourage healthy macro and microinvertebrate populations in the soil.
The life of the soil, very
Absolutely.
simply. Organic matter, compost tea, use it.
Yes.
Very
Yes.
simply. Okay. Now, we don't want to be all doom and gloom here.
Yeah.
And this is the autumn is tree planting time in Central Texas, and even for those people with trees, planting the next generation, even while the big trees are still there, perhaps is a good idea, right?
Yeah, I did the very same thing last October. I have American sycamore in my front yard that was planted in the 50s. I'm starting to see some signs that that tree may not be around for probably another 10 years. I went ahead and planted an 18-inch sapling next to that tree because I'm preparing for the future. It's important that we do plant today because the trees are not going to be there forever.
Right.
Eventually, they will die. And so it's important that we plant trees now so that when trees do die due to drought or
Right.
just natural decline, that we have things that are coming up in the landscape
Right.
so that they can provide shade more quickly.
Exactly. And there are entire neighborhoods where trees are dying, where, say, for example, Arizona ash was the tree of the moment, and now all of those ashes are dying.
Yeah.
So the secondary trees are critically important. Now, you've brought some trees for us to look at, and I want to highlight these because there are a lot of good choices. Everybody wants a fast-growing tree, and they also want a healthy tree.
Right.
A tree that kind of matches both of those characteristics is the Monterey oak.
Yes.
And this is one that is native to the western regions of the hill country and
Yes.
does great here, right?
It does. It's a great alternative to live oak because in most winters it will remain evergreen. Occasionally in a very cold winter it may shed all of its leaves,
Right.
but it is considered tardily deciduous or mostly evergreen.
I love that.
Yeah. It's also resistant to oak wilt.
Yeah.
So it's a great choice as another evergreen oak tree to add diversity in the landscape to mitigate the potential impact of oak wilt.
I think they're very handsome trees too.
They
I love
are.
the foliage.
And we've been planting them now in the Austin area for almost 20 years, and so we've really seen them do great through the drought,
Right.
and they've proven themselves in the
Right.
Central Texas landscape.
Well, I mentioned Arizona ash a moment ago. You also
Yes.
brought a Texas ash, and this,
Yes.
I have to say, is one of the best specimens of Texas ash I've ever seen in a
Yes.
pot. I kind of want you to leave it here accidentally, but these are great trees, well suited to the hill country as well as the eastern part of our region,
Yes.
I think, and then also great fall color.
Yes, they're adaptable as well, just like the Monterey oak. They'll do well in all parts of Travis County and most of Central Texas for that matter. They do have excellent fall color, and that's one of those few trees like cedar elm or flameleaf sumac that you can rely on for fall color each year.
I think that one of the prettiest sights I've ever seen in the fall in Texas, and it's funny because it was at Lost Maple State Park,
Yeah.
was a Texas ash. Very beautiful
Yeah.
tree. The western soapberry is one that is super tough. It's a very well, again, widespread native plant.
Right.
What's its rate of growth, though? I'm not familiar.
It's actually fairly rapid, and this is a tree that will regenerate really easily on its own. I often see western soapberry along the green belts in clusters. So you'll see that a tree has dropped seed and dozens of them have germinated and are
Right.
taking off all by themselves in that, compacted, harsh growing environment where
Right.
there's no supplemental water.
Right.
So they're pretty tough, and they also have fall color.
Okay, and deciduous, obviously.
Yes.
Right. So the western soapberry is another one for people to consider.
Yes.
Now you brought in, and I know you've done some planting projects in the Bastrop area.
Yes.
And this is a loblolly pine from that region.
Right.
So it's got that genetic stock, and there's a little bit of a difference in the Bastrop region, right, with these pines.
Right. The seeds that are endemic, that are native to Bastrop County, are different than those loblolly pines that you would find in
Right.
East Texas.
Right.
They are adapted to about 10 inches less rainfall each year. So their needle coating is thicker and waxier than those loblolly pines in East Texas, and they also generally are shorter and have more fibrous root system.
Well, we've only given people a small taste of the different trees that are available for planting now.
Yes.
I hope folks will look you up online. TreeFolks, you have lots of great events, so I hope people will engage you that way.
Yes,
Thanks so
many-
much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
All right, and coming up next, our friend Daphne.
Hi, I'm Daphne Richards, and this is Augie. Our plant this week is Chinkapin oak, Quercus muhlenbergii. If you're a frequent viewer of this show, and of course I hope that you are, You may have noticed that we highlight quite a few plants with the species name Muhlenbergii. And that allows me to momentarily indulge my plant nerdiness and point out that the common practice of naming plants is for the person who discovered them, or perhaps some other fabulous botanist that other fabulous botanists wish to honor. Well, Chinkapin oak was named for Gottlieb Heinrich Ernst Muhlenberg, an amateur botanist who lived in the early 19th century. Now back to horticulture. Chinkapin oak, a Central Texas native, is a medium-sized tree reaching 40 to 50 feet tall and just as wide. In most landscapes, it's considered a moderately slow grower, but your patience will definitely be rewarded with a beautiful specimen tree. With a nice rounded canopy and glossy deep green leaves, Chinkapin oak provides lots of shade and is one of the rare native species to give us a bit of color in the fall. In the wild, it grows in well-drained soil, but easily adapts to a range of other soil types. And another great quality of this native tree is that it's rarely bothered by pests or diseases and requires very little pruning to achieve its very attractive, rounded shape. Like most other native species, it requires almost no supplemental irrigation once it's established, making it a very good choice for our area in these continuing dry times. And in keeping with our tree-based theme this week, let's talk about mulching. Since we see trees mulched all over town, we know it's a good practice. But since it's often done incorrectly, we may have learned the wrong way to do it. Mulch should be spread over the entire root zone of the tree, but not all the way up against the trunk. This practice is widely known as volcano mulching. It makes the space directly adjoining the trunk nice and attractive to insects and diseases. Mulch helps to maintain moisture, but when overwatered, it never dries out. This is especially problematic for newly planted trees, whose bark is relatively thin and easy to penetrate. And if the bark is damaged or rots away, it creates an easy pathway for invasion into the growing tissue. This could slow the tree's growth or even kill it. Overly wet mulch also encourages roots to grow up into the moist area rather than down where they belong. In extreme cases, this can also encourage the roots to girdle or grow in a circle, eventually choking the tree. I'm going to steal a pun from one of my colleagues. Problems erupt when trees are volcano mulched. Yes, I know that was pretty nerdy. Our guest pick this week is from Tammy, who upcycled this fabulous milk urn as a container for planting succulents. You'll be very jealous when I tell you what she paid for it. Only $5. In your garden this week, it's time to plant some cool season annuals to brighten up your garden for the winter. Dianthus, pansy, stock, and snapdragon are all good choices. We'd love to hear from you, so please visit us at klru.org/ctg and send us your questions and plants from your garden.
Thanks, Daphne. Now let's check in with Trisha Shirey.
The fall vegetable garden is a lot more suited to containers. Okra and corn and those indeterminate tomatoes are really tough to grow unless you have a really large container. But lettuce only needs about 4 to 6 inches, so a window box is just fine to grow those. Kale and chard and are fine with about 10 to 15 inches of soil depth, and some herbs like parsley and dill need a little bit deeper pot because they have a very long taproot. But plant your containers. If you're limited to growing containers, you want to plant them with a lot of harvest in mind. Lettuce and greens are going to give you a continual harvest weekly, while cauliflower and cabbage and Brussels sprouts are very slow to produce, and they're only going to get a one-time product out of that. So better to invest your space in things that are going to give you more food. Now you can get large plastic tubs, and they're going to be a lot cheaper than buying a pot in the same size. They may become brittle eventually, but you'll get several seasons of use out of them. You will have to drill holes in them. But think about galvanized wash tubs or your old recycling bin that you had before you got the rolling bins, even your nursery containers. And you can spruce those black plastic nursery containers or your old ugly stained plastic with spray paint that's made specifically for plastic to match your decor. If you've got an old wheelbarrow that's rusted out or your children's red wagon that they're not using anymore, you can line it with screening, and that will make a good planting space as well. I like to use vinyl screen or coffee filters to cover the drainage holes and keep the soil in and the insects out of the containers, and use a good quality potting soil. You will need to fertilize frequently because these plants are limited to getting their food strictly from you. So especially with something like lettuce that I'm cutting a lot and cutting frequently, I'll give them seaweed or a fish emulsion or another fertilizer feeding every couple of weeks to keep them in production. Now you will have to do some protection for these containers from freezing. Most of these will like to be protected when temperatures are going to be below 30. So you'll have to do a little more protection with container plants than you would with plants that are in the ground. But use row cover or the new blankets and cover them up and then uncover them as you need. And you can also put flowers in, mix things like pansies and alyssum that attract beneficial insects. The bees love alyssum and it smells really sweet and wonderful. Have some nasturtiums trailing over the side of a container. Some edible flowers like snapdragons can be added in. So you can use kale, broccoli, all of those kinds of plants, and they're beautiful. The lettuce comes in a lot of pretty colors and it's attractive as well. So put those on your patio and have something that you can eat, something that's a feast for the eyes as well as your plate. They're really quite rewarding and will do well for you all winter long. For Backyard Basics, I'm Trisha Shirey. Thanks for watching.
Find out more at klru.org/CTG and check us out on Facebook. Next week, Texas Hill Country Olives explains how to grow these fruiting trees. Until then, I'll see you in the garden.
To learn about today's program, watch online and follow CTG's blog. Check out klru.org/CTG.
Support for Central Texas Gardener comes from GeoGrowers, offering custom soil blends for lawns, gardens, xeriscaping, and organic landscaping supplies. More information at geogrowers.net.